known Rocco for 2 years now. And the one thing that I've learned about Rocco is, in the courtroom, he's a bulldog. But when it comes to the kids, he's a big bear. Like he's met Amanda and my children. He fights for these kids because his heart is in it, right? Like his heart is in the right place, and he really has a big heart, especially when it comes to kids. And we're just so grateful and lucky to have him. And the other thing I want to point out is just today it was announced in Ontario that Rocco had mentioned David Fisman. He was on the science committee for advising the provincial government on. He was advising them to keep the schools on lockdown, and then we found out just yesterday that he was on the payroll of the teachers union, who had been fighting right when we first went into this lockdown last March. Our teachers unions were all on strike, and they were fighting for smaller class sizes. And so now these teachers unions have hired this person, and they're getting him to fight for smaller class sizes before we're allowed to return to school. So they're exploiting this virus or this situation to gain personally or professionally for their teachers, for their union, what they have been asking for since last year and for many years, and more funding and smaller class sizes. And they're doing it at the expense of our children. And that's the most unfortunate part. And so every time they do another lockdown, they open the schools. So the very next day, they turned around after this was exposed, that this had happened. We were supposed to be having our schools closed till the 11th of February. Today, they announced, the provincial government announced that the schools are going back on Monday. So the truth comes out, and then things do get better, right? So the kids are going back to school, but the downfall is that every time they reopen the schools, they add new measures. And the one measure they've added is they're going to do asymptomatic PCR testing on the students. And one of the biggest problems with that is, other than we know that it's obviously a fraudulent test, when you test in an asymptomatic or where there's no viral, no COVID, when you test in a population with very, very low incidence of COVID, you are considerably more likely to get false positives. And that creates fear and panic, and then kids get sent home and schools get closed, and it has a whole a lot of ramifications attached to it that nobody's really thinking about when they're putting this into place, that are going to be more detrimental to the children than just staying home and not going to school. So there's really no research being done there.
If I can pipe in for a second, Ted, on that point, I noticed that too. We'll be including that in our school challenge. The mandatory testing is also unconstitutional unless you're informed and consent to it. My experts tell me that we've hired for this challenge is that, and it goes without saying, like every other COVID measure we've seen, has never before in the history of science or medicine been heard of, or used, or tested. So self-isolation, lockdown, it's just never been used. The notion of an asymptomatic disease, my expert tells me, is hogwash. Mm-hmm. It's a notion that's just got invented during the last 9 months. If you're sick, there's going to be symptoms. You can't be sick without symptoms, especially with a respiratory viral infection. Sure, you can be a carrier of a certain disorder and not be sick, but not a respiratory one. You're going to have symptoms. And before I turn it back to you to wrap up, Ted, I just wanted to say as well that people should understand where constitutionally the right to education sits in this country. The right to education is a statutory right up until high school. Free education is a statutory right under the Education Act, first of all. And that education must be dispensed with the terms of the Human Rights Code, which includes equality of treatment. Education in Canada by the courts has also been interpreted by way of that right to education through the International Convention of the Rights of the Child as a Section 7 charter right. Your children have a Section 7 charter right to free education up to high school in accordance with the equality provisions of Section 15 of the Charter, to be accommodated without discrimination on various grounds. So people should understand that, and that the school boards and the school unions and all these vested interests and these fiefdoms, from superintendents to school boards, are not God. And they can't appropriate and misappropriate public funds like this to their own interests and ignore the law under which they act and the Constitution that binds the legislature and everybody else.